I left town for 3 days, just 3 days, to help my sister move into her new apartment. When I returned, there was a Ferris wheel spinning on my land. You think I'm exaggerating, right? I wish I was. There were tents, food trucks, a stage with a live band soundchecking. Kids were running around with cotton candy, a woman was shouting raffle numbers through a microphone, and somewhere deep in the chaos, I heard someone yell, "Welcome to the annual Springfest." My jaw hit the steering wheel. I sat frozen in my truck, staring through the windshield at what used to be my quiet, empty commercial lot. Now it looked like the county fair had set up camp, with no permission, no warning, and no shame. And the cherry on top? A giant banner across the main archway that read, "Proudly hosted by the Greenfield HOA." At first, I thought I'd made a wrong turn. Maybe I was on the wrong block. But the address was correct, the lot fencing, now pushed aside, was mine, and the gravel lot layout was unmistakable. I had purchased this 2-acre corner plot as an investment. It was zoned commercial and strategically located at the edge of the neighborhood near the main road. For over a year, it sat empty as I planned its development. And now it had been turned into a carnival without a single call, text, or email. I stepped out of the truck slowly, like I was approaching a crime scene, and the moment my boots hit the gravel, someone walked right up to me holding a clipboard and a bright orange vest. "Hey! You can't park there, it's vendor only. Public parking is along Elm Street," she said, blowing a whistle and pointing down the block. I blinked. "Excuse me." She gave me that look, like she was used to dealing with disobedient festival-goers. "You're holding up traffic. Please move your vehicle." I laughed once. Not because it was funny, but because I thought maybe this was some kind of prank. "I own this lot," I said. "You're all trespassing." She furrowed her brows. "This is HOA property. Has been since March. Talk to Karen if you have a problem." There it was. The name. Karen. Of course. I should have known. The HOA president with a god complex and zero regard for property boundaries. I'd heard stories about her antics, fining people for having non-compliant Christmas lights, measuring grass blades, even banning lemonade stands, but I'd never had a reason to deal with her directly. Until now. I left my truck parked exactly where it was and started weaving my way through the crowd, trying not to knock over any popcorn buckets or inflatable mascots. I passed 3 booths before I spotted her, standing on a small stage in a sequined sash that said, HOA Chairwoman, holding a microphone like she was emceeing the Oscars. "And don't forget," she was saying into the mic, "the pie-eating contest starts in 15 minutes over by the bounce houses." I climbed up the edge of the stage, and she jumped when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" she asked, stepping back as if I were the intruder. "What am I doing here?" "Karen, you built a festival on my land." She smirked. "Oh, that's what this is about. That lot was unused and an eyesore. We had a vote and designated it for community use. Majority rules." I stared at her like she had just recited alien laws from a made-up planet. "You can't vote to use private land. That's not how property works. This isn't the Hunger Games." Karen waved dismissively. "The HOA charter says the board can reallocate unused space for public benefit if it improves community morale. You should thank me. We beautified your ugly lot." Beautified. She used the word beautified, as if a ring of porta-potties and a funnel cake stand was some kind of architectural upgrade. I took a slow breath. Arguing with Karen in front of 100 festival-goers was only going to make me look unhinged. So I stepped off the stage and pulled out my phone. I began taking pictures. Every booth, every power cable plugged into stolen outlets, every trampled flower bed near the sidewalk. I captured the vendor signage, the festival banner, the snack bar line curling around the generator trailer. Every image was ammo, and I had no intention of wasting a single bullet. Back at my truck, I noticed 2 teenagers sitting on my tailgate like it was part of the fair. One was licking a popsicle. I asked them if they knew who set this up. They shrugged. "Dunno." My mom said the HOA was running it. It's like a thing now. A thing, I repeated under my breath. That was the problem. It was a thing now. Karen had declared war, dressed it up in streamers, and made it family-friendly. But it was still theft, of space, of value, and of rights. I had poured money into this property. It wasn't some backyard. It was insured, legally documented, and intended for future development. But to Karen, it was just an empty canvas for her delusions of grandeur. A food truck driver approached me next. "You the guy who owns this?" he asked, holding a clipboard. "They told me to give the check to whoever runs the venue." "Wait, what check?" "For booth rental. $2,000 for the weekend. That's the rate the HOA set." I nearly choked. "They're charging vendors?" He nodded. "Yeah, didn't you know? I paid in advance. They collected from everyone." I stared at the check in his hand and felt the ground shift under my boot. This wasn't just arrogance anymore, it was fraud. The HOA had turned my property into a for-profit festival ground and kept all the proceeds. I took the check and snapped a photo of it. The man looked confused, but I waved him off with a thank you and said, "This is gonna help more than you know." I spent the next 2 hours gathering as much evidence as I could. Conversations, photos, maps, even drone footage from a tech vendor who was showing off his new toy. By sunset, I had a folder with enough documentation to make any real estate lawyer weep with joy. And the best part? I hadn't even told them what I did for a living yet. They didn't know who I was. They just thought I was another ticked-off homeowner with a grudge. But I had something better than a grudge. I had experience. Before I bought this lot, I spent 10 years managing venues for touring acts and corporate events. I had seen festivals shut down over a single zoning violation. I had seen contracts shredded and organizers fined into bankruptcy. And I knew exactly how to itemize a commercial rental invoice that would make their eyes bleed. These people had no clue what was coming. Karen thought she'd borrowed a field. What she really did was activate the most meticulous revenge plan she could imagine. I looked back at the chaos one last time, lights flashing, kids screaming on the tilt-a-whirl, Karen posing for a selfie in front of the carousel. I took a final picture and whispered to myself, "Let the games begin." By the time the last light of the carnival dimmed and the crowds had thinned, I was already 10 steps ahead. I sat at my kitchen counter, surrounded by photos, video clips, receipts, and a still-steaming mug of black coffee. I hadn't eaten all day, but adrenaline had a way of masking hunger when you were busy planning the takedown of an entire HOA board. Most people would be overwhelmed by the thought of facing a bureaucratic entity like a homeowners association. But I wasn't most people. I used to build contracts tighter than a pressure-sealed vault for live events with 6-figure insurance riders. If anyone knew how to turn trespassing into a 6-digit payday, it was me. And they had given me everything I needed on a silver-plated funnel cake tray. I opened my laptop and pulled up my old event rate sheet. I still had templates from the years I worked with venues across the country. Outdoor lots like mine, with temporary infrastructure, commanded serious rate, especially when used without permit. I ran the numbers with a calculator that had long since lost the numbers on its buttons from years of use. Site rental, $10,000 per day. Utility access and wear, $5,000. Generator impact, cable strain, and ground damage, another $7,000. Security risks, insurance voiding, and unapproved usage tacked on another $10,000. It added up fast, and I hadn't even included punitive damages or legal fees yet. By the time I was done, the total sat at just over $90,000. I titled the draft Invoice, "Unauthorized Use of Private Commercial Property." Then I smiled. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to post angry Facebook rants like some of the other poor souls in the HOA's orbit. I was going to send them a bill so detailed and bulletproof they'd need a legal exorcist to escape it. The next morning, I called Miranda. She picked up on the third ring with a groggy hello. I didn't even apologize for waking her. As soon as she heard the phrase HOA festival on private land, she sat up straight. Miranda and I had worked together during my old job. She handled the legal side of venues I managed, and she had a particular taste for property law and suing smug idiots who thought permits were optional. "Wait," she said after I gave her the rundown, "they did this without your permission, charged vendors, and pretended it was public land?" "Correct." "Do you have evidence?" "Photos, videos, signed checks from vendors, and about 50 eyewitnesses. Oh, and a drone flyover." She let out a long whistle. "This is like Christmas morning for me. I can already see the headlines." "That's not even the best part," I said. "They don't know who I am. Karen thinks I'm just some guy with a gravel lot." There was a pause, and then she burst into laughter. "Oh, this is going to be fun." We agreed to meet in person that afternoon. She'd bring her legal pad, and I'd bring the mountain of documentation. In the meantime, I drove back to the lot to check for damage. Most of the structures were gone by now, but they'd left behind crushed gravel, oily patches from generator leakage, scattered trash, and broken sprinkler heads. A porta-potty still stood near the back corner like a forgotten monument to entitlement. I took more photos, logged the cleanup costs, and documented everything. A city maintenance guy happened to be driving by and stopped to ask if I was the owner. When I confirmed, he shook his head and said he'd wondered why the permits hadn't come through for the festival. "They said it was an HOA event," he explained, "but this is commercial property. Not their jurisdiction." I thanked him and added his comment to my note. That casual confirmation was worth its weight in gold. Unauthorized event. City departments uninformed. More ammunition. When I met with Miranda at the cafe downtown, she was already flipping through my photos like a kid at a comic book store. She tapped the one of the banner with the HOA's name on it. "This one's gold," she said. "Admits responsibility and connects the event directly to them." She took out her legal pad and started scribbling furiously. Miranda worked fast, and when she was in her zone, I knew better than to interrupt. After about 20 minutes of notes, legal codes, and whispered legalese, she looked up at me with a wicked grin. "We're not just suing them. We're sending a formal invoice, a cease and desist, and filing a complaint with the city for code violations. We'll start civil, but if they push back, we go criminal. Fraud, misrepresentation, unlawful use of land, there's a buffet of charges here." I raised my coffee in a mock toast. To Karen's worst week ever. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, I hand-delivered the invoice. It was in a crisp envelope with my name printed on the front in bold. I walked into the HOA clubhouse like a man returning a library book, calm and polite. The meeting was already in progress, with about 10 board members and another 15 residents present. Karen was mid-speech about the resounding success of Springfest when she saw me walk in. Her expression soured instantly. "I'm sorry," she said into the mic, "this is a closed board meeting." "I'll only take a moment," I said. "I just came to deliver this." I handed the envelope to her and walked back out without another word. The whole room went silent for a beat before someone whispered, "What was that?" I didn't stay to watch the reaction. I didn't need to. The document would speak for itself. Inside was a full breakdown of damages, costs, and legal intent, signed by both me and Miranda, complete with her law firm's letterhead. By morning, I got my first email from the HOA. It was short. "We received your invoice. Please be advised that the HOA is not liable for personal disputes." It was the equivalent of swatting a hornet's nest with a pillow. That same afternoon, I got a text from an unknown number. It simply read, "I'm on the board. You don't know me, but I have something you'll want to see. Call me." I stared at the message, unsure if it was bait or a gift from the universe. But curiosity won out. I called. The man on the other end introduced himself as Terrence. He was one of the lesser-known board members, a quiet man who usually just nodded during meetings and avoided drama. "I tried to stop this," he said. Karen went ahead anyway. She ignored legal warnings and pressured vendors into thinking it was approved. I have the emails. That was all I needed to hear. We met the next day at a diner 2 towns over. He brought a flash drive and a printed packet of internal emails. In one message, Karen explicitly stated, "Don't worry about permits. It's community property now. No one's going to sue." Another showed her instructing the treasurer to deposit the vendor checks directly into the HOA events fund, rather than using the usual payment channels. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. He looked tired. "Because I'm done being part of this circus. I told them this was illegal. Karen said we'd deal with it later. But now you're here, and I'd rather be on the side that isn't headed for jail." When I got home, I copied the files and backed them up 3 times. The dominoes were lined up. All I had to do now was push. The invoice wasn't just paper anymore. It was a declaration. Karen had stolen the wrong person's land, and soon the entire HOA would find out exactly how expensive that mistake was going to be. It was strange how fast things moved once someone inside decided to turn the key. Terrence's email packet was a goldmine. I spent the night reading and rereading every message, each more incriminating than the last. Karen wasn't just overstepping her role. She was orchestrating the entire thing like a private business, using HOA influence as her hammer and board silence as her nail gun. The emails revealed a tangled web of deceit. Faked meeting minutes, manipulated board votes, withheld vendor contracts, and direct orders to avoid involving the city at all costs. My favorite line was one where she wrote, "If we ask for permits, they'll start asking who owns the land. Let's not open that door." It was the digital equivalent of leaving bloody footprints into the courtroom. By morning, Miranda had read everything and confirmed what we both already knew. This wasn't just civil anymore. Karen had crossed a line into criminal territory: fraud, willful misrepresentation, and conspiracy to commit unlawful use of private property. We both knew it was time to widen the blast radius. First, we needed more eyes on this, and second, we needed the city involved. So I made 2 calls. The first went to a journalist friend named Max, who worked at the local paper and had a reputation for loving HOA horror stories. The second went to a contact I had in city zoning enforcement. Both were interested the second they heard, "Unauthorized public festival on private land with forged documents." Max called me back within the hour. He wanted to see the site, the emails, and the vendor statements. We met at the lot and I walked him through the whole mess. Even though most of the carnival structures had been taken down, the damage was still visible. Trash was embedded in the gravel, a few crushed lawn chairs had been dumped by the fence, and oil slicks from the power cables had stained several spots near the curb. Max took photos, recorded my statement, and asked to speak with a few vendors. I gave him a list of names from the checks I'd photographed. He promised to keep the story tight until he could verify everything, but the glint in his eye told me he already knew it was gold. Meanwhile, the city inspector met me at the property and raised an eyebrow the moment he saw the state of it. He pulled up the event registry and confirmed what I already knew: no permits had been issued for any HOA-sponsored event at this location. That meant no temporary structure permissions, no food vending licenses, and no sound ordinances cleared. When I handed him the email where Karen said, "No permits means no interference," he let out a low whistle and said, "She really put that in writing?" I nodded, and he shook his head like he couldn't believe her audacity. He told me they'd be launching an investigation immediately and would likely be issuing citations to the HOA within days. Back in the neighborhood, the rumor mill was already spinning. Word spread fast that the HOA had been hit with a formal invoice and potential legal action. Some residents were curious, some were furious, and some were terrified of what their dues might end up paying for. Karen, of course, doubled down. She sent out a public newsletter blaming a disgruntled landowner for trying to sabotage the event after it had brought joy to so many. It was soaked in sugar and arrogance, and it made me laugh. But what really made me pause was the paragraph near the end where she claimed that the HOA board had voted unanimously to use the land. That was when Terrence texted me again. She just lied to the entire community. That vote never happened. I can prove it. He sent over screenshots of actual meeting minutes from the month before the festival. Not only was the land never mentioned, but the festival budget approval had included a placeholder location labeled TBD. A week later, Karen had privately messaged the treasurer saying she locked down a location and would handle the logistics herself. It was a smoking gun the size of a bulldozer. I forwarded everything to Miranda and Max. Within a day, Max published the article. HOA president accused of hosting unauthorized festival on private land. The article was factual, well-sourced, and devastating. It included images of the festival in full swing, quotes from vendors, a snapshot of the invoice, and a statement from the city confirming permit violations. That same evening, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be. Terrence recorded the entire thing on his phone. The room was chaotic. Residents were shouting. Board members were accusing each other. Karen tried to explain that the festival was a spontaneous opportunity for unity, and technically within her discretionary authority. Someone asked where the vendor money had gone. She stuttered, said something about event planning reserves, and then threatened to suspend anyone who challenged her leadership. It didn't go over well. 2 board members walked out. Another called her a dictator. One woman screamed, "You used our name to commit fraud," and stormed out in tears. Karen tried to regain control, but it was clear. The cracks were turning into full-blown ruptures. The next morning, the HOA office door was vandalized with sticky notes that read things like, "Pay your rent," and "This ain't your backyard." Someone had even chalked $90K mistake on the sidewalk in front. It was petty, sure, but it was also telling. The neighborhood had turned. No one wanted to be on a sinking ship, especially one sailing under Karen's delusions. I got a knock on my door that afternoon from a middle-aged man I didn't recognize. He introduced himself as Daniel, a resident from 3 blocks down. "I never liked the HOA," he said. "But this is theft. I just wanted to say thank you for holding them accountable." I appreciated the words, but I told him this wasn't about revenge. It was about principle. If they got away with this, what would stop them next time? Someone's backyard? Someone's house? Daniel nodded and told me more neighbors were talking about petitioning for a leadership change. That night, a group of residents gathered unofficially at the community park. I showed up late, not to lead anything, but to listen. The conversation centered around one thing: Karen had overstepped, and no one wanted to pay for her mistake. Terrence stood up and spoke briefly. He didn't defend himself. He didn't shift blame. He simply said, "We failed to act in time. But we can act now. I move we call for a vote to remove the president." The group applauded. It wasn't an official meeting, but it was the first spark of accountability I'd seen since this mess began. I left quietly, knowing the storm was no longer just mine to handle. Others were picking up the torch. The following day, Karen finally cracked. She sent me an email through the HOA's general inbox. It was stiff and half-hearted. "Dear Mr. Ellis, we believe your invoice to be excessive and unwarranted. The land in question was temporarily beautified and improved, and no damage was intended. We invite you to discuss the matter privately and reach an amicable resolution. Best regards, HOA President." I almost laughed. She still didn't get it. This wasn't about intention. This was about action. Unauthorized, profitable, and now provable. Miranda responded for me. Her email was 3 paragraphs long and ended with a clear message: "Pay the full amount within 10 business days or prepare for court." The clock was ticking, and for the first time since Springfest, it was Karen who had nowhere left. There was a strange satisfaction in watching someone who had acted so invincible suddenly realize the floor beneath them was made of glass. Karen had ruled the HOA like a queen seated on a throne of pool fines and parking citations, but now the pillars holding her up were crumbling fast. As the neighborhood muttered, the press circulated the story, and the city rolled out its violations. All that remained was to deliver the final blow: the official invoice enforcement and the court filings that would back it up. Miranda didn't waste a second. She had already filed a demand letter to the HOA with a breakdown of the charges. $90,000 itemized to the cent, backed by witness statements, photographs, and city-level violations. No fluff. Just facts. The HOA had 10 business days to comply or face a civil lawsuit that would drag every single board member into depositions and courtroom testimony. There was no bluff in it. Everything had been built by the book. I watched it all unfold like an outside observer, even though it was my land at the center of it. Emails trickled in from concerned board members. Some were shocked. Some apologized. A few tried to deflect blame entirely, claiming they had no idea Karen had gone ahead with the festival against advice. But ignorance wasn't a shield. Not when you sit on a board that approved event expenses without seeing a venue contract. Still, I didn't respond to any of them directly. Miranda advised we keep communication formal now. We were beyond neighborly resolutions. This was a legal issue. And the HOA, despite its community club image, was about to learn it functioned like a business, meaning it could be sued like one. Karen, however, wasn't done pretending she had power. She tried one last stunt. A notice appeared on the HOA's community board and email list claiming that the association would be holding a fundraising drive to help cover legal defense costs related to a local landowner's aggressive litigation. She called me a disruptor. She said I was prioritizing personal wealth over community well-being. And she begged residents to contribute an extra one-time fee of $250 per household to fight the invoice. Within hours, my phone lit up with screenshots from furious residents. One woman called me nearly in tears, saying she'd lived in the neighborhood for 14 years and never once felt ashamed to be part of the community until now. Others sent me voice notes, Facebook posts, even porch cam footage of Karen walking door to door, pushing her plea for donations. She had no shame. But the residents had had enough. Terrence organized a town hall that Friday. It wasn't official under HOA rules, but almost the entire neighborhood showed up. They didn't trust the board meetings anymore. They wanted truth, accountability, and someone to answer the growing list of questions. I stood in the back, not intending to speak, but it wasn't long before someone spotted me and asked me to share my side. I walked to the front of the community center room, looked at a crowd of faces tired of the circus, and spoke plainly. I didn't file this invoice for revenge. I filed it because I was robbed. If someone took your car without asking, drove it around town, made money from it, and then handed it back with scratches and empty gas, you wouldn't call that a community misunderstanding. You'd call it theft. That's what happened to me. And not just me. You were all misled. Some of you donated time, money, and effort to help with an event that was built on a lie. I'm not your enemy. I'm the guy who had his land stolen while he was out of town, and instead of an apology, I got called a threat to community spirit. The room was dead silent for a moment. Then, slowly, applause broke out. It started with a few, then spread. I wasn't trying to be dramatic, but the emotion in the room had reached a point where silence would have been more dishonest than anything else. People were angry, hurt, and tired of being manipulated by someone who treated the HOA as her personal kingdom. Terrence stood next and called for a formal vote of no confidence in Karen's leadership. Dozens raised hands. Someone suggested an emergency petition to remove her and appoint an interim president. It was happening. In real time, the community that Karen claimed to be defending was finally stepping out from under her shadow. 3 days later, the HOA office was temporarily closed pending review. Karen hadn't shown up to the last meeting. Rumors said she was seeking private legal counsel and had locked her social media account. The city issued its first round of citations for the unpermitted event, and several vendors who had been misled into thinking the lot was authorized began reaching out to Miranda asking how they should respond if contacted by officials. It was like a slow implosion, not with an explosion but with the groaning collapse of a badly built tower. And right at the center of it all sat the $90,000 invoice. With no response to the formal letter by the deadline, Miranda filed suit. The paperwork was clean, evidence-packed, and entirely defensible. The case wasn't just strong, it was airtight. The HOA was named as the primary defendant, but Karen and the treasurer were both named individually as well. When news of the filing hit the community, another wave of resignations followed. The secretary stepped down. One board member posted a public apology online and offered to testify on my behalf. Even a former HOA president wrote a letter supporting our claims and calling Karen's actions a betrayal of all codes of professional conduct. Karen's last move was one of desperation. She tried to settle privately. Through a third-party mediator, she offered a reduced payment of $25,000 and asked that I sign a non-disclosure agreement and release all public statements. Miranda laughed when she saw the draft. We rejected it immediately. The number wasn't even close to compensating the damages, and her conditions only proved she feared further exposure. We doubled down, preparing not only for trial but for public hearings on HOA conduct violations. The county had taken interest. They wanted to know how something this big could happen without internal check. An investigation into HOA finances over the last 2 years was quietly opened. And from what Terrence hinted, what they found wouldn't be pretty. Finally, the court set a hearing date. Karen was officially summoned. The day that letter landed in her mailbox was the same day she resigned from the HOA presidency. No press release. No apology. Just a cold, typed resignation letter left on the community board with the words effective immediately scrawled at the bottom in pen. It was over. At least for her. But not for the HOA. And not for me. The lawsuit would proceed. The damages would be paid. The lot would be restored, repaved, and fenced with security cameras this time. But the message had already been carved into stone. Entitlement doesn't beat law, no matter how many banners you hang. In the end, it wasn't just about the money. It was about principle. About reminding people that ownership still means something. That you don't get to rewrite rules just because you think no one will fight back. Karen had built her kingdom on assumption. I just brought the invoice. There was something poetic about watching people who once dismissed you now look to you for guidance. After everything, the unauthorized festival, the vendor scheme, the legal fallout, and Karen's dramatic downfall, the dust finally began to settle. My land was quiet again, just an open gravel lot with a few orange markers left over from the survey crew that came to assess the post-festival damage. But what used to feel like a liability now felt like a trophy. Not because of what it was, but because of what it represented. It stood for boundaries that couldn't be trampled just because someone felt entitled. And as the lawsuit moved forward, so did the transformation of the neighborhood itself. The HOA, once Karen's personal echo chamber, was now a humbled and cautious body trying to rebuild from the inside out. Terrence was appointed interim president and quickly implemented emergency reform. The HOA board was downsized temporarily while they conducted new elections. Financial records were opened for review, and a third-party accountant was hired to audit the books. For the first time in years, residents were invited to attend open meetings with real agendas and full transparency. The energy had shifted. No more secrecy, no more dictatorial emails, and definitely no more rogue carnivals on private property. Terrence called me personally a week after Karen resigned and thanked me again. I told him I didn't need thanks. I just needed people to stop pretending that abuse of power was something you had to tolerate in the name of community. The court date came sooner than expected. Miranda had everything prepped down to the comma. We weren't just suing for the original invoice anymore. We were now pursuing additional damages based on city fines, cleanup costs, and even the emotional toll caused by public defamation. Karen didn't show up in person. Her attorney did, fumbling through excuses and begging the judge to dismiss the case based on community confusion and implied public access. The judge raised an eyebrow so high it could have launched off his forehead. Miranda shredded their argument in under 15 minutes. She presented photos, city reports, vendor statements, and the infamous emails where Karen openly stated she would avoid permits and deal with fallout later. The judge didn't even call for recess. He ruled right then and there. The HOA was liable for the full $90,000 invoice, plus an additional $15,000 in penalties and legal fees. Karen was personally found liable for a portion due to willful misconduct. The courtroom was quiet except for the sound of a gavel and the lawyer trying not to audibly groan as he scribbled note. After the judgment, Miranda turned to me with a grin and said, "You just hosted the most expensive street fair in the county's history. And you didn't even sell a single ticket. We celebrated with coffee, not champagne." Both of us had spent years watching people get away with things simply because they knew how to twist authority. This one was a win for everyone who'd ever been told to shut up and sit down while someone else rewrote the rules. Word of the ruling spread fast. Local news picked up the story again, this time framing it as a landmark case in HOA overreach. The online comments were a mix of support, disbelief, and petty joy. One of my favorites was a photo someone posted of a "for sale" sign staked in Karen's front yard, captioned, "When your HOA resume doesn't transfer to the real world." A few neighbors started a joke online suggesting we rename the festival in honor of the lawsuit. Someone mocked up a flyer titled Ethan's Law Days, featuring a cartoon gavel smashing a Ferris wheel. I thought it was hilarious. I even printed a copy and hung it in my garage. With the judgment in place and the HOA cut down to size, I decided to make one final move. I met with a contractor and began plans to renovate the lot. Not for houses or shops, but as a rentable event space, legitimately. With fencing, lighting, security cameras, and a formal rental office on site. The land had proven valuable, not just for its location but for what it had inadvertently advertised. People wanted places to gather, to celebrate, to host small markets and community events. But they wanted to do it legally, safely, and respectfully. Within a month, I had 5 inquiries from local organizers who'd heard about the story and wanted to rent the space. At full market rate, with full insurance, and with all the permits lined up. Meanwhile, the new HOA leadership held their first proper meeting under Terrence's direction. He invited me to attend, not as a participant, but as a guest of honor. I accepted, not out of pride, but because I wanted to see the change. I stood in the back again, just like before, and listened to a very different tone fill the room. Residents asked questions. The board answered with clarity. Financial updates were shared, and a motion was passed to create an internal event committee with actual rules and boundaries. There was even a laugh or two, genuine ones, not the awkward, tight smiles people used to wear when Karen was barking orders. Before the meeting ended, Terrence asked me if I'd like to say something. I kept it short. I reminded everyone that authority without accountability becomes arrogance, that neighborhoods thrive when rules serve people, not when people are forced to serve rules, and that sometimes the best way to restore a community isn't to burn it down, it's to invoice it back into sanity. The room applauded, but this time it wasn't awkward or forced. It was the sound of relief, the sound of people realizing that their voices mattered again. Karen moved out 2 months later. Word was she took a job in another city. No one missed her. Her reign had ended not with a scandalous flameout, but with the quiet thud of a legal judgment and a community that decided it had finally had enough. Her replacement? A woman named Celia who used to teach ethics at the community college. You couldn't write a better irony. In the end, I did what Karen never bothered to do. I respected the boundaries. I didn't step over the line. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just did what every entitled power player hates the most. I played by the rules better than they ever could. I used their own arrogance against them. And I made them pay for it. Literally. On the 1-year anniversary of the incident, the neighborhood held a new event, smaller and more organized, hosted by the newly reformed HOA. It was called the Unity Market. It was held not on my lot, but in the community park where it belonged, with permits, insurance, and city oversight. They invited me again, this time as an honored guest, and they even had a booth selling t-shirts that read "I asked before I fessed." I laughed, bought one, and shook hands with more neighbors that day than I had in the previous 2 years combined. It felt like the full circle. That night, I returned home and walked to the edge of my lot. The lights from the park flickered faintly in the distance. The gravel beneath my feet was even, clean, and freshly rolled. No more oil stains. No more broken signage. Just peace. Just order. Just a silent reminder that if you hold your ground and do it right, you don't need to scream to be heard. You just need to invoice the truth, and watch it echo across every loudspeaker they used to drown you out.